Welcome, Wise Chat. It's Wednesday, August 28th. Hope you're enduring well. Go ahead, get comfy. Thank you for joining us. Like that stream. Mike will be with us in just a moment.
Broadcasting live from the Democratic National Convention. It's Wisecrack Live. I'm currently in the United Center in the Chicago Bulls locker room. We brought our background right here. But in a second, I'm going to be joined by former presidential candidate and senator from New York State, Hillary Rodham Clinton. Hillary, if you want to come in, you can just... She's not going to do it? Because you saw what I tweeted about her years ago? You can't just say I was high that day? Okay, never mind. It's going to be a normal Wisecrack Live. Hopefully everyone's doing well. It's Wednesday.
I thought you were supposed to go high.
I don't know. I got confused. You know, Michelle says stuff, and I try to do the stuff that she says, and I get confused. Chris Maverick's in the chat, so that's awesome. What's up, guys? It's August 21st. We're here with a good old-fashioned Wisecrack Live. Initially today, I'll tell you what I was thinking of talking about. Initially, and I think we might do this on Monday, I kind of wanted to talk about what we can glean ideologically from the Democratic National Convention. By that, I don't mean talking about the specific policies, politicians, or some of the literal stuff going on there, but thinking about what the entire spectacle means about the underlying political ideology in America. I was reading this long review essay about Frederick Jameson yesterday, and there's this line in it. I'm going to see if I can find this really quick.
Who is Frederick Jameson?
So Frederick Jameson, is he's a Marxist literary critic from, I think, Duke University is where he's been for most of his career. He's one of the people that popularized the term postmodernism in an American context. One of his big books was called Postmodernism, or the Cultural Conditions of Late Capitalism. And, a thing that Jameson does in his work, which is really great, is he looks at art. He looks at, literature, film, poetry, things like that. But as a true, in his words, like Marxist literary critic or aesthetic theorist, he's looking at what art and culture can tell us about underlying material and ideological conditions. He has this line, and I think it's from the most recent book, where he says, if we really want to be serious about ourselves, I think we have to admit that white America is characterized by two basic features. We are hypocritical as a people, and we are shallow. And of course, not everyone participating in the Democratic National Convention is a white American. I do think, though, it is an event and a spectacle that's representative of white American culture. There's a lot of examples of that, but it does make me think about this, the hypocritical nature and the shallow nature. Now, we might talk about that on Monday, but what had happened was, in the meantime, I saw that my best friend, Jordan Peterson, put out a new video that had some sections on Marx and postmodernism and Foucault and all this stuff he always talks about, and he doesn't know what he's talking about. And he's with a guy named Logan Lancing, who I guess works with James Lindsay. The title of the podcast, they switched the title. The initial, when they uploaded it on YouTube, the title was something about education. They changed it to The Unholy Essence of Queer, and they put asterisks for the E's in queer to try to get more views out of it. Very pathetic by them, if I do say so myself, but it feels worth talking about. So we're going to do that today. And to kind of tease you, or not to tease you, but give you a teaser for what we're going to be getting into, this guy who Peterson talks to wrote a book. Oh, what's it called? Like The Queering of Our Children or something like that. Just some insane crap that, mixes homophobia and transphobia into one package to convince people that their hardworking and underpaid public school teachers are trying to make their kids into queer super soldiers. But they talk in the video a lot about, postmodernism, about Marxism, and they say some stuff about Marx in particular that made me want to, I don't know, like not be around anymore. I don't know how to phrase it. I was getting really upset, and you're probably going to watch me get upset today. So if that's something you're into, stick around. Stick around. Someone said, are we covering JP for viewer bait? It's a weird thing, right? Like, in one sense, do I have data that shows me that when we talk about Jordan Peterson, that numbers tend to be good? 100%. I have that data. Later today, I'm recording a video, like a React style video on James Lindsay, Jordan Peterson, Kamala Harris, Marx, and Satan. That's a thing I'm going to do today. And I think for me, at least, I'll only speak for myself. I don't want to speak for the whole Wisecrack team. If there's like a Venn diagram, if I can find stuff where one of the circles is clickable stuff and one of the circles is a window into, dark and messed up ideological structures in contemporary American life that are grounded in misreadings of philosophers, I love the middle of that Venn diagram, because I feel like it allows me to really to try to cook in a way that's something, people want to watch. And I know most of you, the main crew, you guys are cool if we do this about a number of things, but of course it does benefit, the sustainability of this channel if we can get people to watch it. So, there you go. Yeah, there's going to be some reacts to Satan. So, but to get started, okay, guys, it's Wisecrack Live. I'm Michael Burns, the producer. Henry, we'll do some preparatory things before we get into it. We'll start, as always, with viewer comments. These are your comments from recent videos and streams. What's the first one up for you, Henry?
First one I have is from Trust.
I love Trust. Okay. So this is from the video that came out last Friday on Alien Romulus, which is more of a video on alien stuff in general. I'll be honest, I'm very confused about the video because the numbers are really good on it, but the comments are low, and our company kind of promised us they weren't going to buy views for it. Sometimes with these sponsored deals, they will make a deal with a company, in this case, like Disney, who produced the film, and they'll say, we guarantee you 150,000 views. But then if we only get 120,000 or whatever, they'll like buy the other views. And I hate it for a number of reasons. But one of the things I hate about it is that YouTube will know. I think they know, and they punish us for it. By the way, this is from that user. They said, as much as I still enjoy the channel's most recent videos, I've missed the old era of examining the philosophies of movies and games. I know they still happen, like with this one, but not as often. I hope we can see more of them. They're more fun and have slightly less real-world doomer vibes. Although in this one, we did talk about cosmic pessimism. But as I've been telling some of you, we're launching a new feed about a month from now, a channel we're creatively calling Wisecrack 2. I wanted to call it Wisecrack TOO, like that store at the mall, limited to, but my colleagues thought it was too cutesy and outvoted me. So it's just going to be 2, like the number. We're going to be doing that. I mean, when I was reading that Frederick Jameson piece yesterday, I was thinking about how I would really love it if the second feed did that, like almost like Marxist literary criticism of film and television, in which the primary modus operandi or whatever was looking at thematics of the narratives of the content we consume, and then trying to draw out the ideological and material conclusions from those things. But we'll see. Go ahead, Henry.
I just got kind of an idea based off of what you're saying and some stuff that was going on in the chat before the show started. I had told Old Grease about the Norton Anthology of Criticism, which,
Mm-hmm.
for folks that don't know, it's a anthology of literary and artistic art criticism that compiles philosophers from the Greeks up to now. Um, it'd be
Sounds
fun
fun.
to do something where we just go through that chapter by chapter with applicable works. It'd be a very ambitious thing, but
Yeah,
one day
I
we're
like
reading
that.
Thomas Aquinas. The other day we're going through Umberto Eco, some Nietzsche, some Sartre. Just
There's
seeing what
some.
they're saying about art through the ages.
I like that idea a lot. I like that idea a lot. Um, okay, let's see. This is from Test Subject. Says, I'm feeling a greater appreciation for both the movie Alien and Feuerbach. The Feuerbach comment I made in the Alien video was not in the script. I just thought about it when we were filming it. I'm glad they kept it in. Um, it says, while he wasn't the main focus, I recognized the fiery Brooke from the recent class I took on 19th century philosophy. Was intrigued to see the line of connection between him, Traphaugen, and one of my beloved science fiction movies. Speaking of the movie, I was astonished to learn just how pregnant with meaning is the chest bursting reproductive cycle of xenomorphs. It was eye opening how the writer consciously and deliberately chose to have a male character be infected with this act of biological violence, and I'll leave it at that. Lastly, well, I always think you do a great job. You did an extra great job with this one. Thank you so much, Test Subject. And yeah, if you don't know about Ludwig Feuerbach, I'll probably talk about Feuerbach a little bit today. When we're watching the Peterson thing. Hold on, I forgot to turn this light on. Let's see if I can get that. Oh no. Oh god. Where's the switch? Or is it just unplugged? Um, and then on the fourth day, God said, "Let there be light." I don't know if he said that on the fourth day. But Feuerbach is a German philosopher, kind of exists in the lineage between Hegel and Marx, is a very important transitionary figure. But if you're someone who's interested in theology, if you're someone that comes from a religious background, if you're someone who is still actively religious but also has a more humanist and egalitarian view on society, you might like Feuerbach a lot. One of his famous bars was, and I've mentioned this before, I'm sure, theology. Sorry, theology is the what is it? Anthropology is the secret of theology, or something like that. Meaning that all theological discussion about God and what God's like is really just a way that humans talk about ourselves. So that when we're doing theology, which is talking about God, divinity, and those metaphysical structures, we're really doing anthropology, thinking about what it means to be human. So really interesting thinker. This is from Jesse Lee Shoemaker Jr. Said, and this is about Ray Gun. Sad that she outshines the good dancers that were there. The Chinese woman that won gold in breaking was amazing. Nobody even knows about her, but this Ray Gun woman is famous. I do think, regardless of what you think about the Ray Gun drama, Ronald Reagan. But no matter what you think about it, and even if you're like, I think what she did is cool, I think we can all agree that it does suck that breaking finally got to be in the Olympics. It's not going to be in the next one. And all of the discussion is about the worst person who was in it and not any of the incredibly talented people who did cool stuff. Like, that sucks. That's all I got to say about that. This is from Tao Tao Strong. It says, some is seriously wrong if we're debating the appropriateness of white guy tacos, while the other side is using language that will get me banned from YouTube for repeating it. Make it make sense. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, too. Like, the people, like the Shapiros and the Matt Walshes and the others of the world who are so offended that Tim Walz want to make a taco with black pepper. I mean, these are people that regularly use, if not overt, like homophobic and racist slurs, they at least point to them quite regularly. Later in the program, we'll talk about Matt Walsh for a second because he's doing some. I mean, here's what yeah. Yeah, well, I want to save it for a little amuse, not an amuse bouche, for maybe a little like break in the action later when we need a breather. But there's one of the other tweets I want to look at before we get cooking. Um, but just as a hint, what Matt Walsh is doing is altering elements of his physical appearance via dress to give him access to spaces that his normal embodied form would not be able to access. Something he's a fan of. Reggie4834 said, yes, Benny boy, it was all for the love of spices and Jesus. They must have tipped on their way to the spice market and colonized everyone by accident. This is really funny. This is because Ben Shapiro was like, actually, Tim Walz, who says that people only like spice for the first time. Why do you think Europeans colonized a bunch of places for spice, Tim Walz? God, this guy. Colonization rips. Rips cultures apart. Hey, everyone who's here. If you have not yet, User 50, I don't know why it's not in the next Olympics, but I know that it's not in the next Olympics. That's all that I know. I'm not here necessarily to be an Olympic correspondent or an expert. Some would say that I am. Most would say that I'm not. But there you go. Glad that everyone is here. Glad that you're all hanging out. Nice to see everyone hanging out in the chat. Really appreciate you all. If you have not yet, please like the stream. It very much helps us when you do. Before we start cooking hard, let's look at the nightmare scenario daughter thing. So, and there's certain people in the zeitgeist I choose to only know a little bit about. One of them is Richard Heinania. I don't care if I know how to say his name right, because he's like a borderline, like Nazi-ish dude. I'm pretty sure. Pretty comfortable saying that. Very much a not good guy. Oh, here, let me see if I can just find like a simple. Does he have a Wikipedia? I bet that will say something about why he sucks. Oh, here we go. Let's see. He wrote for alt-white and white supremacist publications under a pseudonym. He makes a bunch of racist statements. Okay, yeah, he's a bad guy. Okay, yeah, it's very, very simple. Very simple to see that this guy is a bad guy. Go ahead.
The banner on his Twitter profile right now is promoting his book, The Origins of Woke.
Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. Now, just for background, if you don't know who Ella Emhoff is, it's Doug Emhoff, the husband of Kamala Harris's, the husband of Kamala Harris's daughter. She kind of came to prominence during the inauguration when she showed up and was like dressed cool and kind of weird, and everyone was like, "Who the fuck is that?" She's like a kind of like a hipster woman who I think is an artist or like studies art or something like that.
I believe she's a model.
Okay, and a model. Wow, that's fun. And I know that she has raised like hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not more, for Palestinian kids. So I think that is cool. That's just me. That's just me talking. But he said, Ella Emhoff being part of the first family has the potential to radicalize American parents. I'm for women living the lives they want, but this is pretty much the nightmare scenario for most people with a daughter. Why? Because she like is wearing a hat and has some tattoos. Like the sort of rampant, aggressive hatred of women and misogyny here. And someone named Squirrel Master replied and was like, "How so? Because of how she looks? I'm confused. She seemed to love her dad. She's doing great in school and has an equally successful boyfriend. So what's the issue with her?" His response was, "Tattoos on women are generally disgusting." Shout out to women with tattoos. We appreciate you. We see you. But I don't know. As a father of a daughter, if my daughter grew up to be a kind of like cool, successful, artsy, tattooed gal that used her clout to raise money for children being genocided, I would be very proud. There's other pictures, we won't, look at them now, but from the convention of her like hugging her dad. And the responses, and even like Ben Shapiro had one, which people are saying like, this is gross, these people are weird or whatever, because a father was hugging his daughter. Like, what's going on, guys? Like, fellas, is it gay to hug your daughter? Is that where we're at right now? I don't know. But people are being weird. They're being weird about DNC stuff. They're being weird about people having daughters. They're being weird about people having tattoos. There's just a type of person out there that operates with a certain set of presuppositions about why the world is bad and why everything is bad and why tattoos are bad and why women having personalities is bad and why hugging your daughters is bad. And I just like, what do these people want? What do these people want? Do they want to just like wear fake wigs and go to the DNC to act like little freaks? I don't know, guys. I don't know. This is just a week where I don't know if anyone else is feeling this, but this is a week where I'm feeling this sense of just like, truly, what are we doing here? And like everything just feels so dumb sometimes, and it feels like everyone, like no one means the things they say. And it's just like, what are we doing here? Let's just presuppose that heaven's not real and this is it. This is what we want to do with that time. This is what we want to do. I think about it. I don't know if you guys ever had the experience where you have like a day off work and it's maybe the one day you've had off in a while or the one afternoon you've had off in a while. And then you like waste it or you find yourself watching a rerun of a TV show you've already seen and you find yourself thinking like, this is maybe the only free time I have for 5 days. And this is what I'm doing. And I just kind of feel like that in a very meta sense about all of us and what we're all doing. Sorry if that's negative. I hope that you aren't feeling that. I hope you guys are feeling good. And if you're feeling good, share why you're feeling good in the chat. Okay, share why you're feeling good in the chat. Something that does make me feel good is my morning routine of getting up, drinking a nice cup of Joe. And by cup of Joe, I do not mean a cup of Joe Biden. We do love Joe, but we love Joe in terms of the euphemism for a cup of coffee. Old Grease, thank you so much. You can get a frosty chocolate milkshake, or I'll get a frosty chocolate. Let's all get frosty chocolate milkshakes. But I want to give a shout out to our coffee partner. We'll shout him out again in the show. Yes, please. I currently have a bag of their Side Hustle blend, one of their weekly blends from August. Yes, Please is a local coffee roaster based here in Los Angeles. It's a small team, 4 people. They kind of like have enough money to keep it going, but all they do is make good coffee for the at-home user, which is most of us. They don't sell to cafes or coffee shops or anything like that. They just roast coffee and they sell it to people who like coffee. They're not a major corporation. They don't pay us to say this. We get a kickback if you get some coffee. You get 20% off when you use code Wisecrack. You can get a subscription from them at different cadences, so you could have a bag show up every month, every week, whatever works for you. Slightly more expensive than a lot of coffee you might get otherwise, but I would say if you're someone who buys coffee out a lot, it's less than you're going to spend on your Starbucks or whatever in a week. And I would say if you don't make coffee at home, or if you just do the like, where you put it in the pot and let it go. It's fun to have a ritual around making coffee. You get a little like grinder, whether an electric one or a hand grinder. You get some sort of pour over system or one of the air press things or whatever, and it gives you something to do. In the middle of your workday, you take a break. You make a cup of coffee. You relax for a second, and you can use Yes Please for that. So please hit them up. Ground coffee does go bad, and that's why you want whole bean coffee because it stays fresher for longer. And if you have whole bean coffee. Jesse, we're going to end the stream with something uplifting, I promise. I think that's why we're going to end on emails and Q&A stuff. So there you go. Whoa! Amity got a raise at work today. Hell yeah. We love raises at work. We really, really do. Okay. So we're going to get into our main topic today. Our main topic today is Jordan Peterson and this guy, Logan Lancing.
I saw what happened to you.
I'm going to fast forward to the point we want to be at. I think I said it was at 13:22. Let's see how close I can get to that. Oh, pretty close. Okay, so a little context here. Jordan Peterson, we probably know who he is. If you don't know who he is, he's kind of a disgraced Canadian psychology professor who blew up his career because he didn't want to use people's gender pronouns. He's a very angry man, has a very specific view of the world, and is obsessed with using words like Marxism and postmodernism in ways that don't make a lot of sense. Now, on his podcast, the title of the show, again, is The Unholy Essence of Queer. What the? He talks to this guy, Logan Lancing. Now, Logan Lancing is just like a guy who's very angry about education and thinks that all the schools are run by woke Marxist mobs that they want to ruin your kids' lives and stuff like that. He works with James Lindsay. I tried to look up an illegal PDF of one of his books so I could at least scroll through it, but I couldn't find it. But I'd rather pay money for my own assassination than pay money for a book by Logan Lancing. I do have a GoFundMe for my own assassination, so if you guys want to donate, let me know. And before we really get cooking, just two things here. One might say, are we just sort of like rage jacking off to Jordan Peterson for no purpose? Maybe, but I don't think so. And I'll tell you why I still think it's important to point out the flaws in some of this stuff. Two reasons. One, you might encounter people in your life who buy some of this shit. Because I don't know who these people are, but hundreds of thousands, millions of people listen to Jordan Peterson. They read his books, they watch his shit, they take it seriously. And if those people are in your life, you have two options. You could either tell them to fuck off, or you could have a conversation with them about why they buy this stuff. And I would love it if I could help you have the resources to point out to these people why what they're saying makes no sense. I get paid to do this job, and that's pretty cool. But one of the coolest things that's ever happened because of this job is I was at my favorite bar here in Los Angeles. I'm not going to tell you the name. And someone came up to me and they were like, "Hey man, I want to be weird. I watch Wisecrack." And I was like, "Oh, it's cool." And they said, "One of your videos on Jordan Peterson was really helpful for me because I had a friend who was going down that pipeline, and it helped me like have some talks with him, and now he's not in that world." I almost cried. I'm an emotional guy. I didn't because I was at a bar. You can't cry at a bar. That's the rule. Oh, six. Let's go, guys. We're going to talk about Satan today because Jordan Peterson's going to talk about Satan. So let's get into it, kids. So that's one reason. The other reason is that, maybe people who occasionally watch this channel are people who are like, I don't know, I think Peterson has some decent ideas. Or maybe there's someone who read Peterson years ago before he was like fully mask off, and they still find some of this interesting. I don't know. Maybe someone is Googling Logan Lancing and Jordan Peterson a year from now, and they're seeing this. Hello from the future. In the future, I hope it's going well there. And maybe some of this could be helpful. I don't know. Also, it's fun to get angry, and I'm just really trying to get the blood pressure up. So let's start. We're not going to watch the whole thing. They haven't really talked about a lot thus far, but they're getting into a discussion on Marxism right here. So let's start. Maybe we'll start at 1.0 speed. Maybe we'll see if we can hit 1.25 at some point. Hey, maybe we'll get Raw Dome today. Hopefully not.
Fair enough. Okay, let's walk through the woke warpath. Okay, so
the woke warpath.
Lay out your thesis with regards, let's say, to Marxism and postmodernism. Let's start with the woke warpath. Lay out what you see as the philosophical underpinnings. Where are we with the philosophy of the?
Okay, so I do have to say this. This guy, Logan, he makes clear in this video he's never formally studied philosophy or political theory or economics. Doesn't have a background in those fields. I will show you in a bit. I did pre-watch a big chunk of this. He does make clear that he hasn't read the books by the people that he's talking about. Now, does that mean that if you've never got a degree in philosophy, that you shouldn't be able to speak authoritatively about philosophy? No, I think it means you should operate with a certain level of humility, as we all should. But I think it's important to note that people like this are publishing books and doing podcasts and making videos speaking about areas in which they do not have, I would say, a requisite amount of expertise. And something that's weird about philosophy, this would happen to me sometimes. I remember when I first started studying philosophy, I'd go to like a family Christmas event and somebody would be like, "Oh, Mikey, I hear you're studying philosophy now." I'm like, "Yeah." And they'd be like, "Well, let me tell you my philosophy. You get what you give." And I'd be like, thank you. That was really helpful. I'm going to go back to school and share that with everyone. But it's one of those things where people feel, and maybe this is okay, I guess, like entitled to authoritative interpretations on, where I wouldn't feel comfortable being like, "Oh, you study science? Let me tell you my theory about molecules," and just like saying shit. But, I guess I'm built different. We'll get cooking, but I want to establish that at the top.
The radical left. And is the combination of Marxism and postmodernism the right initial lens to view that through?
It's not.
Yes, precisely. So I'll try and keep track of the things I want to explain here. And because I first heard you use the term yourself, Dr. Peterson, of postmodern neo-Marxism. And I remember thinking the first time I heard it, well, that makes no sense. Postmodernism is post-Marxism. How could it possibly be that these two things have combined? And the first time I saw it used by a leftist academic in print was from a man by the name of Peter McLaren. And he was writing...
I'm just going to Google Peter McLaren. Let's see what he's talking about. McLaren, academic, Canadian sociologist. Oh my God. If you we don't have to, but if you Google this guy, he looks sick. He looks like a 1980s rock singer. But cool. We'll keep going. But if you do yourself a favor and Google Peter McLaren later, and just look at a picture of the guy. Oops, I clicked the wrong button. Let's go here.
In the 80s, and he was describing what the critical Marxist project, the critical Marxist tradition, was doing, was taking postmodern principles and applying them to identity politics and education. So that was the first kind of verification that I saw that, okay, Peterson's...
So when he says verification, the thing I do find confusing here, so Peter McLaren was a professor of urban education, and it seems like just from looking at the work he did, that he was in the line of like a Paulo Freire type guy. Paulo Freire wrote the Pedagogy of the Oppressed. Okay, I'm looking at this guy's background. So I think that when this is someone who it seems like used theories from Marxism to inform a theory of education that prioritized thinking about inequity and social justice in an educational context, which is cool. I think that sounds very, very cool. I think that, probably if that's going to be like your best source for understanding the totality of a thing, I'm a little confused. But let's keep
on to something here. To your question about what is at the core of Marxism,
I'm going to stop pausing so much, guys, but the fact that this guy's about to tell us about the core of Marxism makes me want to put my hand up my ass till it comes out of my mouth and punch myself in the face until I fall asleep forever.
One of the things I'm most proud of with the queering of the American child, I didn't delve too much into it in the woke warpath because I don't think
the queering of the American child.
I understood it at that level yet. But the heart of Marxism, in my view, and I think I could speak for Dr. Lindsay, but have him on.
Dr. Lindsay, Dr. Lindsay,
give his interpretation is.
You don't call someone doctor if you're referring to their expertise in something their PhD isn't in. I'm just going to be honest here. If I was talking about nuclear physics and you were like, something Dr. Burns said. No, Dr. Burns didn't say that. My fucking friend Michael said it. Now, if you wanted to be really pretentious and I was talking about philosophy and you wanted to say Dr. Burns, sure. I don't want you to say it. I'm sure it's like Dr. Professor Chris Maverick. If you're talking about cultural theory and things of that nature, literature, you could be like, Dr. Maverick makes that point. But if Dr. Professor Chris Maverick is telling you where the best pierogies in Pittsburgh are, you might not be like, well, according to Dr. Maverick. I don't know. Okay, we're having fun. I should have got high today.
That Marxism is a theology.
Okay, it's not. We're going to say more about this, but this is the James Lindsay thing that this guy's getting, that Marxism is a theology. It's the new line you see him saying over and over. Now, what is theology, right? Theology is the study of the nature of God and of religious belief. Normally, when we think about theology is pulling ethical and philosophical meaning out of religious text. It's giving us a systematic understanding of the divine, of things of that nature. At the core of his project, Karl Marx is a historical materialist. What does that mean? Well, it means that he does not think there is an immaterial metaphysical structure that drives human meaning and value, right? If I am committed to a theological metaphysic, what does that mean? Well, it means that I think that there are invisible forces that have material effects and causation in the world. It means that there are invisible principles that give a moral coherence to my existence. Marx, on the other hand, very famously is a historical materialist, meaning that for him, what affects and moves history are sets of material conditions and contradictions produced by those material conditions. I'm going to use a very basic, very dumb example here, but like, you know, at some point in history, there wasn't sweaters. And then there was sweaters. Now, you might say they're sweaters because in a Platonist sense, there was a perfect form of a thing you could wear to be warm. Maybe in a spiritual sense, God drove someone to this thing. But in a historical materialist sense, there was a set of material conditions in which there was a contradiction between the desire of the human to be warm and the external temperature being cold. But eventually, people figured out they could get some like animal fur and shit and, you know, tie it together with a glue stick. I don't know, you make a sweater and you wear the thing. And now we're in a new historical epoch, the epoch where we have sweaters, and now humans are able to survive in colder climates and do different things. That is not a theological account of history. It's a material account of history. I swear to God, I'm going to try to pause less, but I think it's important to establish that right off the bat that Marxism is not a theology in any way. Oh, did I miss a super chat? Oh my God. Okay. So Evan Sim says, well, we're almost there. That's one of the upshots of the whole Teriology thing. People go on Rogan all the time and claim BS, but because Terrence Howard is doing his math, it was blatantly obvious. And thanks for the imaginary boof, Old Grease. Really, really appreciate it. And you know, it's going to be harder to stay as locked in on the chat today because we're going to, for a little bit, watch this video. If you guys do have longer questions or thoughts, obviously drop them in the chat. We'll make sure we get all the super chats. You can always email us at wisecracklive666@gmail.com. And we're going to go look at emails at the end of the episode. So let's go. He just said his big idea that he pulls from Dr. James Lindsay, man of the blade, that Marxism is a theology. I tried to just give you some prefatory notes on why that maybe doesn't make sense.
It's not an economic theory. If you
I said I wasn't going to pause again. How is it not an economic theory? Okay. Marx wrote a book. He tried to write 3 books. He wrote one. 2 of the others are incomplete. Some of you know this. The project was called Capital, a 3-volume theory. Capital by Karl Marx. And we're going to watch, if we have time, there's actually a video, I'm going to toss it on our playlist in a second, where Professor Richard Wolff explains this in very simple terms. I'm tempted to do it now, but we'll stick here. You could say Marx was a bad economist. You could say Marx has inconsistencies in his economic theory. You could say Marx's economic theories no longer make context in an economy that's largely moved, or in some ways moved in the West, to immaterial labor. All of those would be incredibly valid criticisms of the Marxist economic project. But Karl Marx has an economic theory. It just exists. And it's in his book called Capital. And the core of this economic theory has to do with the creation of something called surplus value. A big idea for Marx is that when we work for someone else, so let's think about this, for example. I get paid, I don't know, I get paid, I have a salary. I don't know what the hourly rate is, but the wager of my employer is they pay me a certain amount of time. And with that time, I make content for this channel. Now they pay me a certain amount. Ideally, the content that I help make in that time creates more value for my employer than I was paid to make that thing. So let's just say I get paid $40 an hour to make content, but then the content made during that time has a value of $80 an hour. Well, that's an extra $40 that is surplus value. And that is a surplus that my employer gets to have, right? And as these things compound, the goal of the employer is to increase surplus value while keeping labor value as low as possible, paying us the lowest wages as possible, so that there is that ability to create that wealth. That wealth then, unconnected to labor, becomes capital. Capital is able to make more stuff. There's a lot more here. You wrote a lot about it. But that is what I just said. You could say it's stupid. You could say it's bad. But that is an economic theory. It just is. There is a reason that in economics departments around the world, they teach Marx. Some of them teach Marx because they're Marxist economists. Shout out to Kamala Harris's dad, who was a Marxist economist. And in some, they might teach Marxism as a failed economic project. But for someone with a straight face to say that Marx doesn't have an economic theory, that Marxism isn't an economic theory, is about as stupid as saying that Albert Einstein didn't have a theory about gravity. Right? Like it is a known thing. Yet in instances like this, people who write fucking books that people buy and go on shows that people watch just get to say this stuff. It truly drives me up the wall. From the window to the walls. Hopefully everyone's doing okay. Glad that you're here in the chat. I did look at the chat for a second to see the comment. Boss makes $1, I make a dime. That's why I poop on Company Times. Oh my God, this is funny. Someone said, this is a terrible breakdown of Karl Marx. You just explained capitalism. That's the point, buddy. I'm not trying to be mean to you, sip, shot, type figure. That's what I'm saying. That is the explanation of capitalism, right? That's what Marxist economics is. Marxist economics is an analysis of capitalism, focusing on, in one part, surplus value. That's what he's writing about. Marx wrote about capitalism. He didn't write an economic theory that's like, here's my other thing. He analyzed capitalism. He didn't outline how to do a revolution or this sorts of things. He wrote a bunch of words analyzing the structure and the function of capitalism and how it works in a variety of ways. Now, he did think that capitalism itself, and we see this in reality, necessarily creates cycles of crisis. This, again, a thing that is true, a thing that has happened throughout history. We have depressions, we have market collapses, all these sorts of things, and Marx writes about how that's inherent to capitalism. Well, why does he write that? Because that's what he did. He studied capitalism. Okay. But it's just like, you're not going to own me on saying like, bro, you just described capitalism. And another thing, like Marx famously described capitalism and said, another important point, that capitalism was good and better than everything that came before it, right? He's like, this is better than feudalism. This is better than slavery. This is better than primitive communism. This is better than all the other things because history is the development of different economic structures that respond to the material structures of their time. Marx was simply saying that capitalism is the current high point of economic development, but like all other systems that came before it, has inherent flaws and contradictions. Here are some of those things, and here is how, if we look at it, we can see how those will eventually collapse. The collapse of that thing will lead to this, which will lead to that. But let's watch Mr. Lancing speak about this.
Read the economic and philosophic manuscripts. I think Marx is very clear. He says human beings are creative and we're social.
So when he talks about the philosophic and economic manuscripts, unpublished in Marx's lifetime, often referred to as the Paris manuscripts, there's sort of some things Marx wrote when he was younger. It's one of my favorite texts. This is not me dissing it, but it is not a representation of Marx's mature economic theory, which again, we have a book called Capital that gives us that. And it's in a period where Marx is still riffing off the language of Hegelianism, and as we talked about before, Feuerbach. So what Marx is doing in that text is more anthropological and describing the nature of the human and how economic conditions affect human beings. He says a bunch of stuff after this, which I will let play, that's largely correct.
Now, I'm a pretty plain guy. I'm not an academic. I have no special training. I still don't consider myself a writer. So I'm going to put this in plain terms. When Marx says human beings are creative, he means we see something in the world like a stick, and we've got a vision in our head of what we want to turn that stick into. We've got a vision in our head of what we want the world to look like. So maybe I want to make a spear. I grab a sharp rock, I start cutting away at the stick, I whittle it away, I slowly match what's in my head to the physical reality of my world. That's what Marx meant by humans have a creative nature. And in that,
not incorrect at all. This is Marx kind of riffing off Hegel. If you ever read Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit, he gets into this sort of stuff. But yeah, the idea that humans interact with the world around us by projecting our own humanity and self onto stuff, and we make things, we see our humanity reflected back at us.
In that, the deeper meaning of that is that when we look into the world, we see ourselves reflecting back at us. We see our creativity, our subjective thoughts,
he is describing the
vision of my
idealist
sphere,
part,
objectified in the real world. And what he said is we look out into the world we're humanizing with our creativity, and it reflects back our human nature, and we see ourselves as gods, essentially, is what it comes down to.
So note how he said we see ourselves as gods, essentially, is what it comes down to. There's where he starts editorializing a bit. When Marx talks about labor in the Paris manuscripts, aka the economic and philosophic manuscripts, what he's trying to get at is the way in which we feel or we get alienated under industrial labor, industrial capitalism. The point is that, like, let's say historically, I make shoes. I'm an Italian shoemaker. I make it a spicy shoes. And so I make shoes, and maybe there was a period where I would make a pair of shoes. I'd work really hard on them. And then Henry comes to my house, and Henry gives me money, and I give Henry the shoes. Now, of course, before I sell them to Henry, they're in my house, and I'm like, oh, I made these things. And maybe I feel good about it. And I hope that you all feel good about the stuff that you make. But feel good about these shoes. And then Henry comes over, and Henry's like, I want to buy those shoes. And I'm like, great. And I think, you know what? These are worth this much of my time or labor or whatever. I tell Henry they're $50. Henry gives me $50. He gets my spicy shoes. It feels okay because I made a thing. I saw my labor and creativity reflected in the thing. I feel like I got a fair exchange there. What Marx describes in the text that Lancing is referring to is that in industrial labor, what happens instead is, if I'm making shoes, I make shoes for someone else who takes the shoes from me. They maybe pay me $10 for my labor. They go sell the shoes for $60. They're getting $50 profit. I'm kind of alienated from that process. Or maybe it's even worse. Maybe I used to make shoes and sell them directly. Now I'm at an assembly line, and all I'm doing is like doing the final laces or something like that on a shoe before it leaves me. And I'm paid for a tiny part of this when someone else is making a bunch of money off the shoe. It also works the other way, because think about, the way in which, like, I have a laptop in front of me right now. All I see is the laptop. And this is, Marx would call this a form of commodity fetishism. I'm like, this is a laptop. It just exists. What I don't see is that this is an object that was probably put together in a factory in China. Who in the hell knows what the working conditions were like there? It was put together. It was shipped. All this stuff happened. So I'm even like alienated from the process of production of things, and I just treat them as these ready-made objects. In doing this, in no point does Marx imply to say, I make shoes, thus I am a god. That's like the weird Kanye West version of it. If anything, and early, and I'm going to get a little in the weeds here, so apologies in advance if this is too in the weeds, guys. But Marx at that period is still in his early period, what some would call his, pre-epistemological break era. And he's working in this Hegelian Feuerbachian tradition. I already said before, in relative to one of those comments, Feuerbach's whole thing is that the secret of theology is anthropology. So Marx is working maybe in a kind of linguistic or theoretical paradigm where there's remnants of theological language, but it's being used to describe humanity disconnected from the heavens. So when he says it's a theology, when he says that, this process of analyzing human labor means we're essentially gods, it's not there in the text, and it's not there in, as far as I know, in the scholarship. So we'll keep going.
Marx said our species being is also social. That's our spiritual species property, to use his own terms. And what he means by that is we're not born in the world alone. We're not born in a vacuum. He said the tradition of all dead generations weighs like a nightmare on the brains of the living, meaning we're born.
This is a part where I just wonder what you all think about this. Does it seem crazy, radical, or communist to say we exist in a world that preceded us? We're born into families that have history. For example, if you come, I'm gonna be a little dark here for a second, and I apologize. And if this applies to any of you, I love you, I see you, and I hope you're okay. One side of my family has a history of addiction and alcoholism. I was born into that family, and I did not have a choice in that. So it was a set of cultural conditions that I just existed in, and I didn't really have a say in that. And I was born into a certain era, a certain region, all these sorts of things that prefigure us, and that is the history at a personal level in which we live and in which we make ourselves, and we can't just disconnect from that. If that sounds like crazy or radical, please let me know why and how in the comments.
Meaning we're born into a world that's already been humanized. We're born into a world where other people have used their creative potential to transform the world into their vision. So in a sense, our
the burden of what has been.
Right. Yes, exactly.
They're doing the Harris thing, guys. They're doing the Harris thing. See his fucking little smirk there? They're doing the burden of what has been
that
thing.
Peterson
We talked,
smile
yeah,
is awful.
yeah. So guys, just in case you're not, I hate that we know this, but what we know here is that James Lindsay has a whole thing. This is what I'm recording a video on later today, guys. So there's a full video coming out on this. James Lindsay reads Kamala Harris saying, disconnected from the burden of what has been, or whatever it is. The whole point of the saying is like, we can do something new in the future, disconnected from what has been. To use my analogy from before, that would literally just be saying like, I come from a family of alcoholics. I'm going to not be an alcoholic, right? Not crazy. You could say like, I was born into a family of people who were racist. I'm not going to be racist. Great. Do it. So they're laughing right now because this misreading of Marx also to them implies that like Kamala Harris is stupid.
Exactly. And do a little hand gesture. And
right. And a cackle, an evil cackle.
An evil cackle, because when women laugh, it's evil. Guys, I'm not like a political fan of Kamala Harris, but it's just like, it should feel weird when you just see, and some of you are going to be like, oh, you're doing liberal identity stuff. When you just see a bunch of white dudes roasting a woman of color for how she laughs, it's weird, guys. It's weird. I know, and I don't want to say weird tapping into the current democratic discourse, so maybe I'll use a different word, but it's sus. It's not a good intellectual argument to say that someone is bad because they laugh. Jesus Christ.
It like curls your spine.
Right.
It curls your spine. Let me know if you have a weird laugh in the chat. I got made fun of for my laugh growing up because I used to laugh in this way that was kind of like I almost died doing it. And people would say I sounded like a porpoise losing its virginity or something.
This is the blood of small children.
And what Marx said is because we've got this creative potential to transform our world into our own vision, and we're a social creature, what those things differentiate us from the animals. And because we can do those things, we make history. Meaning when I'm born into a world others have worked on. They've already transformed nature. If I'm born in a primitive tribe, I'm not going to be going and creating a spacefaring civilization.
This is all like correct.
The history of the people that have come before me preloads my consciousness, and that makes history. And then
again, we'll see what he says. If that's wrong or weird, please tell me why. And I don't mean that rhetorically. If there's something about that to you sounds sketchy or crazy, please do let me know.
The people in my present tribe, whatever you want, your city, those of us attempting to send rockets to Mars, we then socialize the next generation into the world. And Marx's whole theology is the idea that we can arrest this process of history. We can direct it. It's not
Nope. Some of this as well, and my friend Dave pointed this out to me recently. A lot of what they're actually doing here is like they're reading Lenin's interpretation of Marxism back into Marx. So he is correct in so much as if Marx wrote somewhere, and if he did, and I have absolutely not read every word of Marx. So if someone knows better than me, I'll totally take the L on this one and admit that I'm wrong. But if he wrote someplace that we have the subjective ability as humans to arrest and redirect history, please let me know. Because so in a sense, what he's doing right now is he's focused on the sort of subjectivist interpretation in which Marx would say, like, I can freeze history and use my little like sling ring, like Ned in the Doctor Strange movie to do whatever I want in time and space. But Marx is talking about structural conditions, right? He's not saying like go Power Rangers and change history. The point is to say that we can analyze sets of historical conditions and look at the way in which those conditions set the stage for types of transformation. The point would be that like capitalism already has contradictions that are inherent to it, and that system is going to collapse. And it might be the case that there's a way to, fight for or organize for the betterment of that system or the perpetuation of a new system, but it's not like a radically deciding what history should be type thing. But I guess then if we're gonna even go with his logic here, and I always assume these people love America. Maybe I'm wrong, but I assume they love America. But if you're gonna do that, you could say like, okay, well, a small group of dudes at the pub in America, decided to reshape history via their actions. And I don't think we would say that's, I don't know, communist or crazy, but we'll let Lancing keep cooking.
Something that just has to happen. And it's incumbent on those who are oppressed to arrest it, because
Mormon
the
time,
group
yes.
in power who's created the society with capitalism, it would be the bourgeoisie and their private property and the laws, rules, and regulations.
Yeah, I just want to say that Chris Maverick made the point about how you can't exist outside of it. That's why he was very involved in like trade unions and labor unions, in so much as the labor unions and the trade unions weren't like and aren't like, let's do the revolution. They're like, let's fight to build power for working people.
Regulations that have been built up to solidify their social status and their domination. They're not going to overthrow history and direct history in the direction we want it, because they're pretty set. They're enjoying their lives. They're happy. So it's incumbent on the oppressed to become conscious of this fact that we can arrest history and we can direct it.
We can.
And that's Marx's program,
It's not.
arresting of history through conflict to drive it to an ultimate endpoint.
No, so what he's describing there is almost a form of like political accelerationism, where one tries to like throw gasoline on the contradictions of history, but that's not what Marx is arguing. And especially in his what we'd call maybe his more mature works like the German Ideology and especially Capital, he is not saying here's what you should do. He's not outlining a sort of praxis oriented, political philosophy. He is analyzing the functions of a system. And when Marx talks about contradictions, those are contradictions inherent to a system. We don't get to just like make them. He's not like, hey guys, want to go do a contradiction together? That's not how this works, right? The way, and again, like I think what these guys don't understand, I don't think they understand the basis of historical materialism, where I imagine, I'm going to do a little test right now. Let's look at the Marx Wikipedia and let's see. I'm going to type in Control F materialism. Okay, it's on like let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The 6th line of the intro of Marx's Wikipedia brings up historical materialism. It also says he's an economist, but that's at the Wikipedia level. If we were destined to only ever look at Wikipedia, we would still see that historical materialism is the primary approach of Marx and this is Wikipedia, his analysis of capitalism. Analysis. Not saying what to do or how to do it. In analysis, using a historical materialist approach. I'm just going to read a line from Wikipedia now. I make fun of Wikipedia, but this is just showing how easy it could have been. This is the 3rd paragraph of Marx's Wikipedia page. Employing his historical materialist approach, Marx predicted that capitalism produced internal tensions like previous socioeconomic systems, and that these tensions would lead to its self-destruction and replacement by a new system known as a socialist mode of production. For Marx, class antagonisms under capitalism, owing in part to its instability and crisis-prone nature, would eventuate the working class's development of class consciousness, leading to blah, 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 their conquest for political power and the establishment of a classless society constituted by the free association of producers. This is Wikipedia. They are internal tensions that are self-produced by the structures of capitalism. Does it shape our consciousness when we observe those things happening? Yes, that's why we have, it's why politics, at least in America, has changed since Occupy Wall Street and the mortgage crisis and all these sorts of things, because we see these contradictions happening. It makes us think, oh shit. When we see people getting more involved in climate-based actions, right? People just see materially a direct contradiction between the system of capitalism and the perpetuation of the climate of this planet. And they go, it makes us think about stuff the same way in which you don't think about how your car's engine works when it works well. When your car stops working, you start thinking about the structures of the thing. You know what I'm saying? Okay. But again, that was the third paragraph of the Wikipedia page for Marx, and it outlines things that are already directly contradicting Lancing.
One where we look out in the world and it reflects our humanity back onto us. Marx said, when we look into the world and we're one with nature and nature is one with us. I think his precise words to describe it in almost biblical terms was, he said that when man looks out and he revolves around himself as his own true sun.
They're so obsessed with biblical terms, it's like you forget that, like, hey friends, for a huge chunk of European artistic and intellectual history, Christianity was like the starting point for a lot of stuff. It was a cultural point. Like operas reference Christianity. Literature references the structures of Christianity. You ever hear of art in the Renaissance and Enlightenment era? You ever heard of it? You ever heard of that? So of course people are pulling off of literary tropes that reflect biblical narratives, because the Bible is a dominant force in Western art and culture, but it doesn't mean that everything is secretly theological.
I mean, it doesn't get any more theological than that. So I think
it could actually get much more theological than that, Logan. It could get significantly more theological than that. What he's quoting is a metaphor. Sometimes we use metaphors to understand things. And when we use those metaphors, doesn't mean we're saying the thing, because we're using a metaphor to understand another thing. Logan, I wouldn't be like this if you didn't write the book, Logan. Because Logan, you said you're not a writer and you're not an expert. That's fine. I'm not a writer or an expert on, I don't know, like Bolivian politics. But you know what I didn't do? Write a polemic book about Bolivian politics that shows no evidence of me spending time studying Bolivian politics or the traditions of that. And then when I wrote the book that I didn't write on Bolivian politics, I didn't go speak on a bunch of like podcasts and stuff authoritatively about Bolivian politics. I just don't say anything about Bolivian politics because I don't know anything about it. That's the difference between you and I, Logan. Okay, it's 11 right now. We're at the halfway point of the show. If you're just tuning in, this is Wisecrack Live. We're excited to see you here. Guys, Drift King wants that raw dome. He's got to go pick up his kid soon. And let's see if we can get there. You get raw dome, in case you didn't know this, at 1,000 concurrent viewers. I take my hat off and I show you what lies beneath. So there you go. What's up, Logan Reese in the chat? I've been teasing, guys, the new Wisecrack channel. That's coming out. And Logan is a part of that, which I'm very excited about because Logan rips. So thanks for liking the stream. Thanks for being here. We're going to do some fun stuff. Melanie points out that it's 2 p.m. because Melanie is a fascist who believes that East Coast time is the only time. You people. Yeah, this guy says he's a dragon slayer and then he has a picture guys, Logan Lancing's Twitter is a fucking lot. So if you want to go down that rabbit hole, you can, but it's a lot. So, but let's get back to Logan. But thanks for being here. Really appreciate it. Today we're looking at Jordan Peterson's newest episode called The Unholy Essence of Queer, which is super cool and not weird at all. Definitely not antagonistic towards anyone that doesn't follow their heteronormative narrative. But in it, we're looking at Logan Lancing, a guy who's written books on wokeness and queerness in schools. They're talking about Marxism right now. And it's not great.
That's the heart of it. And everything derives from that. It doesn't make sense that it's an economic theory. It never has. That's why over 100 million people.
It doesn't make sense that it's an economic theory. He hasn't referred to an economic theory. I'm just going to bet this. I actually did, guys. I tweeted at Logan yesterday. I don't think he responded to me. I'll check. But I don't think Logan responded to me because I asked a genuine question because he posted a big thing on his Twitter quite recently about how Marx doesn't have an economic theory. Well, I did it on the Wisecrack account because why not? Yeah, he didn't respond. The dragon slayer was afraid to slay my dragon. I said, slay my dragon, Logan. And Logan said, no, Michael, your dragon's too scary. And I said, Logan, come on, just slay the dragon. You're a big, tough guy. You are a big, tough guy. Okay. But yeah, like, and if you're just tuning in and if you think I'm just being too annoying here again, like Wikipedia shit, right? Marx wrote books on economics. He wrote on the economics of capitalism. His most notable work is called Capital. People like David Harvey, a geography professor from City University of New York, famously has written a huge volume on Capital. He's given a series of lectures that are all on YouTube, actually. It's very cool of him. There's scholars who have spent their lives studying Marx as an economist. And then Logan is just like, It's a lot. Henry, stay alive. We need you, bud. Okay, let's...
100 million people died starving to death in the dark. That's why it doesn't work.
1 million people didn't die starving to death in the dark because Marx wrote Capital. So he says Marx doesn't have an economic theory, and he doesn't because 1 million people died in the dark because of it? What are we doing? I mean, and again, this is like, if we want to be as charitable as possible to the thing that they're doing, we could say, well, Lenin reinterpreted elements of Marx that he took into Bolshevism, which led to a level of violence that was then taken to a whole other level by Stalin, under the guise of Marx. I mean, you could, I guess, say, but even then, like, talk about Stalin then, or talk about Lenin. I think that if we talk about, deaths because of capitalism, I think if we looked at like America or a lot of countries in the West, when we look at, people dying because of access to healthcare, when we look at starvation, we look at, deaths because of addiction and houselessness, there's all these ways that we could say capitalism has created conditions that have led to death. No one says that Adam Smith is a mass murderer. You know what I'm saying? Like, no one's ever like, oh, Adam Smith, the largest murderer in the world. Or when America or another, capitalist nation goes to war with a nation in the Middle East to make sure the oil reserves are at a good price and a bunch of civilians die, no one says, Adam Smith technically did that. I'm just saying.
Work because he mapped his economics on top of a theology to sell it is.
So he doesn't have an economics, but he mapped it on top of a theology to sell it. Hey, fun fact, the book he's referencing wasn't published. And wait, I might be off here. It either wasn't published or like wasn't really around during Marx's lifetime. Let me see if I can find this. Oh yeah, they were compiled and published in 1932, almost 100 years after he wrote them. They were notes Marx wrote when he was 25 and 26. Okay? Just again, he is not referring to Marx's mature work. His entire argument is built upon some notes that Marx wrote when he was 25 and 26. To be fair, pretty good notes. That someone else published almost 100 years later. And that's what the argument is based on. Let's see. So someone said, Capital is not an economics book. It's a critique of political economy, specifically Smith and Ricardo. I can't tell if Eddie's kind of like joking or whatever. How is that not an economics book? In being a critique of political economy, it starts by understanding the machinations of the capitalist economy for the sake of understanding it as a political and economic system. You're totally right that it's about Smith and Ricardo, but that'd be like saying, like, if I wrote a book critiquing like Niels Bohr and Albert Einstein to understand their overarching, views on quantum mechanics. It's not a physics book. It's a critique of quantum mechanics book. Like now we're just kind of, you know what I mean? But anyway, I can't tell if that comment was sort of like silly or not. So there you go. You're probably just being silly and nice, and I'm sorry if that was me seeming like I was being defensive. I'm just all worked up because of Lancing. I do not like
my
Lancing.
opinion.
That's his opinion.
Security is top of mind for many Americans during these crazy.
I love the ad. And listen, I have to read ads as well, but I think it's so funny that Jordan Peterson's ads are for companies that are like, turn all of your money into gold. It's so good. Let's see. I think they say some more stuff we want to hear. I'm gonna I'm gonna mute for a second or just turn the volume down while this ad plays about gold.
Security for our country, security for
so, I just think thus far, like the important stuff here is that almost everything said is wrong. I think it's confusing that someone has the confidence to make these arguments and write a book based on these arguments without understanding it. I think, and you could maybe argue that like it's not as much of Lansing's fault, but then Peterson, whose whole thing is that he's like a real smart boy, is giving him a platform to say all this stuff. And I do think, like, clearly some people are reading this, or some people are listening to it, some people are taking it seriously, and it just bothers me so much. And this isn't an exaggeration to say, so I used to when I taught philosophy at the university level, people would sometimes write about Marx, and like if Logan Lancing was in one of my classes and he earnestly wrote what he just said in a paper, I would give it like, if he seemed like a cool guy, I'd maybe give it a C and then tell him to come to office hours and try to explain to him why it was wrong or something like that. Was there another super chat that we missed? This guy needs some woke dome. Yeah, guys, we all need woke dome. We don't want that woke dome? Okay. And I would just say this. Let's all have good faith in how we're interacting with each other. I would just say, you're right. Communism killed 8 billion people. I think a lot of you who are like regulars in the chat, we're all nice. We're all good people. So let's just be cool. Let's just be cool. Everyone's cool. We're all good. Diane Kruger effect. Okay, so we're gonna get into a little bit more of this. Thank you for hanging out. We're gonna end on some positive notes, and I think I have notes because I was watching this video yesterday. Okay, yeah, we'll watch a little bit more. There's a reference to the mother of rapper Earl Sweatshirt in a few minutes, and that's a true thing. In this video, Lansing talks about the mother of Earl Sweatshirt.
Okay. So let's delve into the theological side for a moment, and then we'll return to the postmodern element.
And I will note as well, these people are obsessed with talking about theology now, and they also never reference like theology as a discipline. And again, I'm not trying to say that to speak about things, you have to read all the books on the thing. But if you are an academic with academic training who has a university called Peterson Academy, and you are presenting yourself as someone that people can trust when they're learning about things, you have a level of responsibility to know something, I would say quite a few things about the field that you're talking about.
Okay, so there's two things you laid out as far as I'm understanding what you're saying. And the first is, some support for your argument that this is a theological movement is that, it is a post-religious movement, and it's also something that Nietzsche predicted when he discussed the death of God. He said in The Will to Power that the human race would run an experiment in the 20th century that would likely doom millions of people to investigate the validity of a resentment-predicated communism, and that...
This is one where I'm not going to have time to get into it. I promise you that that's not how most people read what Nietzsche's saying there.
If we...
You trust me or don't trust me, and I'm saying that with that caveat. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. I'm honestly not as like much of a I don't want to say the word expert. I'm less of a Nietzsche scholar than I used to be a Marx scholar, but that's testy.
Learned the proper lesson from that, then perhaps the sacrifice of lives would have proved valuable and necessary. Now, that's a hell of a harsh thing to say, but it's also quite the remarkable prediction. And of course, Dostoevsky saw the same things coming, especially in his book Demons, which is as accurate a prodroma to the Gulag Archipelago as you could possibly hope for. Okay, so let's look at this theologically.
Let's look at it theologically, Jordan. I'm really excited.
I think it is a theology. It's a post-Christian theology. No. It's an anti-Christian theology. And so part of the reason it's an
anti-Christian theology. And let's be real, an anti-Christian theology, I'm pretty sure would definitionally imply it would be a theology that described some form of divinity and the divine operation in the world that just wasn't Christian. So that it was Gnostic or just any other theory that basically said, like, no, Christ isn't actually the divine figure. This thing is the divine figure. That would be an anti-Christian theology. A materialist account of history is not a theology because it's not pointing to a transcendent point of reference. So think about it this way. We live in the material world because we're all material girls. Shouts to Madonna. Was that her song? No. Or is it Cyndi Lauper?
Material Girl? Madonna? That's Madonna, yeah.
Okay, great. I just didn't want to get roasted in the chat. But we are material beings that live in a material world. Now, some of us might believe in God or some form of divinity. Now, is that God something we can see? No, because it's a transcendent principle. It's something that transcends our kind of empirical understanding of the world, our material understanding of the world. But that transcendent thing, right, gives us a sense of meaning, purpose, whatever. When we are deriving our understanding of the world from our observations of the world, that's not transcendent. If we're going to use the philosophical terms here, it's immanent to our plane of existence, meaning that in general, that's non-theological. But we'll see what JP says.
Christian is because Marx's fundamental presupposition is that the God of power does and should rule.
Marx's fundamental presupposition is that the God of power does and should rule.
Which book is that in?
It's in the one that we haven't read. So I think that what is happening here, so this would be my good faith interpretation. When Marx talks about power, he's talking about economic power. He's talking about economic power because he's analyzing how capitalism works. He's not saying this is how it should work. He's not saying this is how I want it to work. He's not saying here's an ideal system. He's simply saying this is how the thing works. So it's not I guess it's the sense of, I guess that's what happens when they're reading Marx as a theological or existential figure and not a materialist and not an economic figure, because he's not saying power is good and the real God is power and we should all strive to have power because that's the true divinity. No, he's just saying this is how capitalism works in my reading of it. And in my reading of how capitalism works, a tiny group of people have access to a lot of wealth and other people don't have access to wealth. And this has this effect on society. And then, we can analyze culture and stuff like that, which shows us how there's cultural and religious institutions which just serve to maintain, that economic structure. And if you're one of the people who doesn't have access to wealth, your life probably sucks. But it's not a theological argument. Now, there are people, there are theologians who talk about Marx, and there's liberation theologians who have entire theological systems that are grounded in a type of Marxist analysis of, the social justice side of Christianity. And Jordan Peterson could totally talk about that, but he doesn't.
Right. So that's quite a claim. And I think actually you can understand the attractiveness.
Oh, I missed a super chat. Let's see. I want to make sure I get to that. Jack Esposito. Oh, sorry. So Michael. So Blasphemous says, Michael, listening to them is painful, bro. I thought you loved us. I do love you, but sometimes when you love someone, you make them suffer. Jack says, do you like Karl Marx? Do you agree with his ideas? Any good reading suggestions on the subject? Make a video on the philosophy of homelessness. So Jack, I think that like or dislike is maybe a weird categorization here for me. There are philosophers and figures that I like. I think Marx is important. I think Marx is an important figure in political philosophy. I think that if one wanted to learn about Marx, whether it's reading or watching stuff, David Harvey's really good. David Harvey has some good lectures on YouTube. Richard Wolff is an economist who's really good in talking about that. I like some of the French interpretations of Marx. Others might disagree with me on this. Etienne Balibar, Balibar, has a book that's called like an introduction to Marx that I like. But yeah, I think that, and I think the reason that people still read Marx is that he offers an analysis of capitalism that makes sense. I don't think it means it's absolutely correct, but here's what I will say. In my experience of teaching in college classrooms and teaching students who I'm very certain in most cases were not Marxist or radicals or whatever. I had a student once she was awesome. And first day of class, she opened her laptop and she had a big Mitt Romney sticker on the laptop. You know what I'm saying? Like this is, and that was when I taught at like a Catholic school in the Mid-Atlantic region. And when you talk about certain elements of Marx, like alienation, for example, people like do intuitively feel that. I rarely had a student argue against the way in which under capitalism we can feel alienated from ourselves. You rarely have a student that'll argue against the observation that under our economic system, there's this necessary contradiction between, workers and, you know what I mean? Like there's now there might be a student who says, yeah, of course that's how the world works. That's why I want to be an owner. Like when Marx describes how capitalism works, a lot of people who are, pro-capitalism, they don't disagree with Marx. Right? Their whole point isn't to say that Marx is wrong. Their whole point is to say, yeah, he's right, which is why I want to be on the side that has all the surplus capital. I don't want to be a member of the working class. Like, what is the American dream in so many ways other than the idea that you can transcend the working class to be a member of the upper classes so that you have access to surplus capital, But thanks for that question, Jack. I feel like we did maybe make a video that kind of dealt with homelessness, but maybe not.
Of that claim, especially on the economic side, because the idea that there is a small minority of people who hold comparative power in any human social hierarchy is true in some manner. It's particularly true if the society is corrupt. And it is also the case that even the most benevolent of social organizations are corrupted to some degree by power. And so power is a major league god, you might say. And it's very...
I would be interested to hear, I'm sure he's talked about this, Jordan Peterson's thoughts on
very
capitalism.
Attractive intellectually, especially if you're a rather rigid reductionist and you don't like to think in a sophisticated manner, is to reduce everything to power as...
If you don't like to think in a sophisticated manner, he's across here from my man LL Uncool J, who has never read a book in his life and is just sort of saying stuff. I think that's pretty unsophisticated.
Foucault did, Power and Sexuality in Foucault's case. And you can make a credible case for that. You can make a credible case that your relationship with yourself is one of power, and your relationship with your wife, and your relationship with your children, and your so-called friends, and every economic
so-called friends? What are you
relationship.
saying?
It's all boils down to power, and only the naive think differently. And so the world's a war of power. And that's not only an anti-Christian doctrine in the most...
But I don't think he's explaining why that's anti-Christian. And again, we're veered so far off the path right now because this whole power thing he's describing, I don't think is something you would obviously associate with Marx. So he's already veered off that path. He's saying that we can analyze the world via power relations. He did bring up Foucault, and I do think that's closer to something like you get in Foucault. But then analyzing the world in terms of power is anti-Christian. I don't get the connection.
Most fundamental way, it's almost literally a satanic doctrine because
almost literally, see, they're so obsessed with Satan now, guys.
Almost literally?
Yeah, like, so we went from Marx doesn't really do economics, he does theology, and his system of theology is one where power is God, which leads to an analysis of society where we only see power relations. In seeing these power relations, it's doing something anti-Christian, and in being anti-Christian because it's analyzing society in terms of power relations, it's quite literally satanic.
Because in the Gospels, for example, Christ is literally tempted by the Satan who offers him power as an alternative to the proper principle of sovereignty. Okay, so that's the first thing, is Marxism is a theology of power. All right.
It's really just not. You can trust me, you can not trust me. Just do if you're on the fence here, put some time aside and do a little bit of reading. We'll watch a little bit more of this. I actually want to watch a clip that describes Marxism in terms that aren't idiotic, but I just think that's just not true, and I don't think it's helpful.
The next thing is that you pointed out was that it's a dialectic of oppressed versus oppressor. And so that's also interesting.
So he didn't point that out. That man didn't say that. This oppressed versus oppressor thing, I'm just going to point this out to you guys. It is not there the way that they say it is there. Now, we looked at Marx's Wikipedia before, and it described tensions that are internal to capitalism itself. So if Marx talks about an oppressed and an oppressor, which I'm like almost certain that, here, let me see something, Marx, capital, full text. I'm going to type in the word. How do you spell oppressor? 2 P's? Okay, so the word oppressor, I'm pretty sure is not in this book. Oh, here we go. We want the PDF version. This is going to help us. Sorry, sometimes when I get bored, I just control F stuff, and then we see if it helps. Okay, so I'm pretty sure the word oppressor is not in Marx's Capital. The word oppressed. Oh, oppressed we have 5 uses of. Only one of them is in the text. Most of them are in the footnotes. Let's see, oppressor. Oppressor's not in there. Okay, so 5 uses of the text, and it's a quote, and it's describing. So the way in which the term oppress is used in Marx's Capital are quotes that are describing working conditions. So he's quoting people talking about working conditions in Europe, and then he uses the word oppressed to point that out. I'm just saying that's what he's doing there. The dialectic as a concept is not something that you do. You don't get to make a dialectic, right? You don't get to decide where it is. It's describing a process, and this is like in Hegel, the unfolding of logic. But in a Marxist sense, again, it's not oppressor versus oppressed, because that also gives a weird moral quality to things that Marx isn't interested in doing. Marx doesn't say the workers are magical spiritual souls and that, the bourgeois are powerful, oppressive devils or whatever. He's describing an economic system and how that economic system materially affects people.
Interesting theologically, because the story of Cain and Abel is an oppressor versus oppressed theology.
But here's the thing. If he's going to ride this line, I'm sorry for doing this again, guys. If Jordan Peterson, who's really into the Bible now, really into theology, he's into this Cain and Abel thing right now, which I think makes no sense. But if he's really into this thing, well, the Bible talks about the oppressed a lot. And the Bible in the Old and New Testaments talk about the spiritual value and worth of the oppressed over against the oppressor. There's a theme of justice and social justice throughout the Old and New Testament. So again,
and the spirit of Cain is the spirit of the resentful oppressed, who
Dapper Cat's
rebels
building a dialectic in
against
Dad's basement.
what would you say? The upward
Am I
striving
inadvertently
individual who makes the
quoting
proper
Maverick?
sacrifices, destroys him, and
Yeah, Mav, we're in the same brain space right now. I did see that I said a thing, but then you'd already said it in the chat.
rebels against God, pridefully and deceitfully. Right, so that's another theological element. Now, the Marxists would say, well, religion, Christianity is the opiate of the masses, and perhaps Cain, under the sway of the Lucifer, who's regarded as an admirable rebel by the Marxists, including Marx, is the upholder of the proper revolutionary.
His evidence for why Marx loves the devil, by the way, is he made this other video with this other guy's an idiot about how when Marx was 19, he wrote some like emo poetry that talked about the devil.
Was
spirit.
Was John
Go ahead,
was John Milton a Marxist? Because like he gave
Yeah.
the devil all the sexiest lines.
Yeah, and that's the funniest thing is like in the video, which maybe is coming up in the thing we're filming later today. Peterson says like, and that's straight Milton. And it's like, yeah, it is straight Milton because Marx is using literary tropes that were very common in his time. He's not, yeah, it's a lot. People are just so obsessed with Satan.
Right. But it's certainly the case that
Now you might be saying, oh, they're so obsessed with Satan, Michael. You made the email address for the show, Wisecrack Live 666. And to that I say, fair. But as a reminder, if you want to hit us up, if you have thoughts or questions on any of this, I see there's an email already. We're going to get to this in a bit. Do hit us up at wisecracklive666@gmail.com. If this isn't making your heart rate go up enough and you need another upper in your life, just a reminder, our stream partner is Yes Please Coffee. I fuck with these guys a lot. They make incredibly delicious coffee. They're based here in Los Angeles. They don't pay us money to say this. You get 20% off if you get it through us. It's very, very good, and I want to hear about it if you dig it. They also include zines, which I love. I'm an old millennial, so I like zines that include playlists and stuff like that. I know that at one point they had a record company that they stopped doing. But do check out Yes Please Coffee. It's a way to support our show and drink good coffee. Speaking of someone, I bet Jordan Peterson's one of those people like doesn't drink coffee because never mind. I almost said something mean, and I'm trying to exemplify the principles of humanity that I want to be afforded to me.
the notion that existence itself, history itself, all relationships are a battleground of power between the oppressor and the oppressed is central to Marxism as far as I'm concerned. It's not a Marxist.
As far as I'm concerned,
not a Marxist idea in and of itself.
It's not a Marxist idea in and of itself. Okay, so I do like this because he kind of admits that he's just projecting a thing onto the work. He says the oppressed and oppressor thing is essential to it. I mean, it's not a Marxist idea in itself. Come on, Jordan.
But it's central. And it's also a pretty damn saleable idea, especially if your culture is corrupted by power and you have your self-serving reasons for regarding yourself as victimized and oppressed. You know, that was what Nietzsche objected to with.
And they have this weird obsession too with anyone who's victimized or oppressed is like bad. And that's just like a weird stance. You know, it's a weird stance to be like, oh, this oppressed or marginalized group, there's just a bunch of pussies. Like, I just don't think that's a very helpful, framework. I do think, I'll be reactionary for a second. I think that one could say that in certain elements of culture, we can sometimes fetishize victimization, or that people can grow a little bit like, this is me doing like South Park brain, but maybe grow a little too quick to be like, I'm oppressed. But I think there's a difference between maybe individuals making TikToks about how they're oppressed and structural types of oppression that we can just look at and see that are materially and economically and socially apparent. It's just weird to make those the bad guys. Like, oppressed people are the bad guys. We should be really suspicious of them. People who are victims of the exercise of power of others, we should be skeptical of those guys. It's weird. But we see this in examples when, like, there's a type of person in this world who, like, here's a news story about how someone like bombed a school, and they're like, yeah, but you know what? Those people whose school got bombed, they're kind of weird. They actually voted for someone I don't like. And, I hear that they're maybe like, I just don't trust it. I just don't trust it. And it's like, okay, so we're victim blaming dead kids now. This feels good. feels good as a human. It's not a nice thing. I'm getting ads, by the way, in my watch together for baby safe washing detergent.
With regards to the philosophy of resentment. And Marxism is the philosophy of resentment writ large. And the problem with that is that there's a lot of things in life to be resentful about. Right? So it's easy to sell. It's a doctrine.
So it's not a philosophy of resentment because it's not built in a sense of like emotive reaction. I think if there's any sort of emotive or resentful part of Marxism, or at least like the work of Marx and Engels, it's living through an era where they're seeing the horrors of industrial capitalism in front of them and they're like, oh, this sucks. But, when we think about resentment, when Nietzsche talks about resentment, he's talking about people that are developing like theological systems. Like it is a sort of resentment to be like, you have wronged me as a world, but my God will get vengeance over you. And I hate all this shit, but my spiritual self is stronger than all this, and I'm going to go to heaven when I die, you pieces of shit. Like that's a type of resentment, right? It's not resentment to say, when we analyze the functioning of industrial capitalism, we noted a difference between labor value and the final value of a product. We can look at this in terms of surplus value. When we look at the production of like that's not resentment, as far as I see it.
That suits the pathologically immature.
It suits the pathologically immature. My guy, your job is wearing weird jackets and like just yelling about boogeymen with other sad white dudes.
Yeah,
and so
surprised how tame he is today.
Yeah, it's one of his mellower days. Yeah.
So is there anything in my characterization of Marxism as a theology that's at odds with the manner in which you're construing it?
No, I don't think so. And a point to add is not only is it an easy sell, but it's a really easy sell to children.
This is where it gets real weird, guys. The idea that Marxism is an easy sell, if it was an easy sell, it'd be a lot more popular and people would like believe in it. It's an easy sell. American liberal capitalism. That's an easy sell. When you watch like both the Republican National Convention and the Democratic National Convention, it seems like liberal democracy is a pretty easy sell as people watch speeches from these politicians and cry and clutch their pearls. Doesn't seem like Marxist economics is an easy sell. And when he says it's an easy sell to children, here's why he says that, guys. This guy thinks that in schools, like public schools in America, they're teaching kids Marxism. That's a thing that he thinks. Now, I'm not a kid. I haven't been in school for a while at the elementary level. I do not think, please correct me if I'm wrong, that they're teaching this. Here's what they're getting at, I think. So he referenced that theorist, I forget his name, earlier in the video. Now, there's an educational tradition you get out of people like Paulo Freire, the pedagogy of the oppressed, which is making an argument that education is liberatory. Why is education liberatory? Because education can give the oppressed the opportunity to understand and analyze the world for what it really is and do stuff with that. It shouldn't be shocking to say that world historically, education either hasn't been offered to oppressed folks or it's been offered in very ideologically coded ways. Like look at the history of the education offered to both, enslaved Black people in America and, Black people in the South, after the end of slavery. Look at the education that was offered to, indigenous people in state-run reservation schools in America. If you're going to look at me and say that they had wonderful educational opportunities that gave them the critical tools to analyze society, so that's what that educational tradition is getting at. And I think that's how they're trying to draw that connection, I guess. But it's so tenuous. And again, like you talk to any actual teacher, I've never talked to a teacher that's like, yeah, I mostly spend my time doing like Marxism in class. They're normally just like, I have more classes than I can teach. I don't have a teacher's aide this year. I have 36 students. We have state mandated tests. The kids won't stop looking at their fucking phones, and I might drink during lunch. But if teachers who are watching this now or watching it later, please like genuinely let us know about this.
Which is the relevant area where I'm most concerned. Adults can be set in their ways and of course, you're going to have those with psychopathologies that really.
I'm going to stop here. I will just say people like this guy and James Lindsay, thing I love about these guys, it's a lot of weird dudes who have never worked in education and who don't have children that are really obsessed with teachers and kids. Make of that what you will. To me, that feels a little weird. So let's watch something real quick. This is simple because I want to make sure that anyone who's walking out of here has a sense. And I'm going to speed this up because Richard Wolff talks slow. So I'm going to put this bad boy at 1.25. Let's just watch a Marxist economist talk for a second about what Marxist economics is so that leaving this video, no one's just like, Michael just says stuff, but who knows? He's a notorious liar. So how can we trust such a notorious liar? I mean, and if there's people in your life who watch Peterson and LL shouldn't write books, Jay, like, so you can at least just be like, no, it's an economic theory. You don't have to like it, but like it is a theory.
This is Richard Wolff from Democracy at Work with another response to an Ask Prof. Wolff.
And this guy, just to be clear, he's a professor of economics, I think at UMass Amherst. Pretty well-regarded economics professor, at least in this tradition.
Question from our Patreon community. This one comes from Adit M. Shah. And I want to answer it because it's about basic Marxian theory and questions and criticisms of it, and then a bit more about where it leads. So let me begin with a brief summary of the Marxian argument and then turn to the questions and criticisms. The Marxian argument goes like this. Whenever a person goes looking for a job in the private sector,
and this is it. Just pay attention right here. He's going to describe Marxist economics in a very simple way.
Talking to an employer, the conversation goes something like this in basic economic terms. The employer explains to the prospective employee, here's the work we want you to do, here's how the work will be done, where the work will be done, and so on. And they go over all of that, and then they get to the question of payment. And the employer says, I'm, of course, going to pay you a wage. How about $20 an hour? And the employee, let's assume for simplicity, agrees, $20 an hour. Both the employer and the employee know something, even if they can't put it into words. That was Marx's contribution, among others, namely, putting what I'm about to say into words. Here we go. The $20 that the employer pays the worker will result in that worker coming to work 9 to 5, 5 days a week, etc. During that time, the worker's brains and muscles will be busy doing what the employer told him to do.
That's what I'm doing right now. It's weird to think about this when you're at work.
And at the end of the day, the week, the month, the employer will either have more quality or more quantity because of this worker's effort than he would have had if he didn't hire the worker. So he's paid the worker 20, that's an outlay by the employer, but what he gets back is the extra output in quality or quantity that the worker he hired helped to produce. That extra, due to the work of that worker, has to be worth more than $20 when the employer sells it. Why? Because otherwise there's nothing in it for the employer. If the worker's labor produces $20 more worth of output, which the employer gets when he sells it, and then he has to use it to pay the worker for the wage, there's nothing left for the employer. Conclusion. The profits of employers are the difference between the value added by the worker's labor and what is paid to that worker for adding that value by his or her brains and muscle being used as the employer directs. What does Dr. Howard Becher and what do I?
Okay, so just we're leaving you with that. I put a link to this in the chat if you want to watch the full Richard Wolff video. Someone pointed out he might be at New School now. Here, I can look it up so I can make sure I'm not just lying to you guys. But Richard Wolff, one of those people. Let's see, Professor Emeritus at UMass. Yeah, I don't know. Okay, so someone you can look into if you just want some more straight up economic analysis. So I would say, like, conclusion, Jordan Peterson and LL, I don't care about him, are using really bad misreadings or willful misinterpretations of the Marxist or Marx's philosophical and economic writings to make very odd arguments about the function of power in culture, which goes to the ends of largely villainizing teachers and villainizing people from marginalized and oppressed groups. That is the seeming outcome of what they're doing. Much of what they are saying involves borderline lies about the point of Marx's work, and we see in someone like Richard Wolff that this is not the case. So hey, there you go. Let's do some emails now before we sign off. Again, you're watching Wisecrack Live. I'm Michael Burns. I'm here with producer Henry. Yeah, we have one question. I'll probably like summarize some of it a little bit that I think is relevant. But we check our emails. So you can hit us up at wisecracklive666@gmail.com. We check the comments of these videos. So leave a comment. If you're watching this later, we do go read these. I can't wait for some of the really cool comments we'll get from this one. Reminder as always, coffee partner, yes, please. If you drink coffee, consider drinking Yes, Please coffee. I actually promise you, it'll be the best coffee you've ever had. And it's a way to support the channel. So check that out if you get a chance. Video coming out Friday about theme parks and how theme parks are secretly taking over our cities. Get ready for it. And I think on Monday on the stream, we might talk about the cultural logic of the DNC. But shoot us emails. We always want to know what you guys want to talk about. Also, if you're on our Patreon, we have a Discord server. We always want to hear your thoughts about streams over there. And then if you really want to get nerdy, I've started up a reading group over on Patreon, reading Byung-Chul Han's Psychopolitics. So I'm going to do at least one more video on that before I go on vacation for a week around Labor Day. So check that out. Now, email, this is from, I'll just say first name, this is from Donovan. The basis of their question is, how long do you give an unhealthy work environment to change once you've communicated your boundaries and issues? So Donovan graduated with their master's. They've been working as a counselor. They've worked in a lot of clinical settings. Let's see. So they've been upfront about their desire to work with certain community clients. Let's see. They're feeling burnt out, like they don't have a balance. They've enjoyed the pay and flexible schedule, but they know this isn't the only place they could have those. The original appeal of this job was having diverse clients, as they have a passion for working with people of color, and it's important for them to do that. They hate that accessing diversity has been through folks involved in the legal system. They've been more vocal about their needs in the workplace. And then they ask, in your experience, how long would you give a workplace to accommodate your needs before leaving? With how early I am in my career, I have to prioritize myself, and I believe, that the company will always take care of itself. Apologies for co-authoring a book with you over email. Totally fine. So yeah, I think the gist of that question is, doing something that you want to do that has some sort of value, but not getting that in the way that you want it in their work as a counselor, and wondering early in their career how long they should put up with this. Now, what I'm getting from Donovan's email is that good at his job, early enough in his career where maybe he has the flexibility to find something else. I'm going to give a very pragmatic answer. I'm curious what others think. Atticus, thank you so much. Really, really, really appreciate it. My sense there would be, if you're in a work environment like this, maybe you could set a timeline, like 3 months, 6 months, something like that, where you kind of tell yourself, if it doesn't get better in this window, I'm going to start at least passively looking for other jobs. Now, unless you have money to fall back on, I probably wouldn't quit if you didn't have something lined up. But that would be my tendency, to give it a concrete window. Because the thing I've seen people do is stay in jobs they hate for way too long because they keep waiting for it to get better. This happens in relationships too, right? People stay in relationships way too long because they keep waiting for a thing. If you've communicated your boundaries, give them a reasonable amount of time to see if they can adjust to those and meet you halfway. If they don't do that, then maybe you start using some of your free time to look for other jobs. That would be my thought. Henry, if you let me know what you think in chat. Let us know what you think about this one.
Yeah, I'm curious about the severity of the violations or the alienation going on. If it's something that you're in talks with and they're communicating about, and it could be fixed in a week, I'd say, set up a timeline, talk to them about getting fixed in a week. If it's something that it just feels like you're continually talking about and pitching down the road, start using that leverage to find somewhere else. I feel a little burnt because I have in my customer service jobs, the communication tends to be frequent and quick enough and casual enough to where it gets things fixed, and it hasn't been anything severe. But then like in some of the media jobs, I'll bring up labor issues and it's like, you're cut, you're gone, that's it, goodbye.
Yeah.
So I'm very kind of antagonistic towards that relationship, but I mean, I'd honestly already be looking somewhere else and have the leverage before you need to bring it up.
Yeah, good to have leverage if you can. But chat. So we have people saying, don't assume it'll get better. Have an exit strategy. Someone said making a budget for the timeline you'll give. Yeah. And I also think too, like there's a world where if you might want to get out, you could start putting some money away so you have a little cushion as well. But yeah, the thing that I've regretted doing before is being in professional situations where when I get in a job and I'm comfortable, I don't put any effort into keeping my resume fresh, looking for other stuff, having an updated LinkedIn profile. It's stuff that feels shitty, but it's worth doing. Okay, got another emails from Cardell, and I think this kind of applies to what we're doing. The question is, how do I not become a bad person over time if I make a good amount of money? And I want to compliment both these emails, because both of these people stated a clear question and then expanded a little bit, but it's really helpful for this context. This person got laid off in November without severance. They got a minimum wage job they worked since, but in the last month they got another job in tech. They grew up middle class. It's been eye-opening for them because they had to move to cheap housing. They had to go to the food bank. It sucked. Yeah, it sounds horrible. I'm really sorry you had to deal with that. Made this person empathetic for people struggling in those situations. They started volunteering at a food bank and joined some organizations pushing for policies that help people. I think I'm a better person than I was when I got laid off. So going back into a well-paying job, I'm afraid I'm going to slowly become bad and lose my drive to help others. How do I not become a bad person over time if I make a good amount of money? That's a really interesting question. I guess here's what I think. One important thing to remember, and I'll kind of be Marxist again for a second. Even if you're making a good amount of money, if you do not own means of production, if you do not have access to stockpiles of capital, you are still a member of like the working class if you are trading your labor for some amount of money in return. Shouts to Richard Wolff. And as you've talked about before, tech is a tenuous world. People in tech can make a lot of money, but things change a lot. You can lose jobs a lot. You've been on both sides of that. I think that like trying to remember and trying to keep, and it sounds like you have this, so I feel like maybe this is, I reading this, I'm not worried about you, but I feel like just keeping a baseline of empathy for everyone, reminding yourself that even if you start making just ass tons of money, that when you go get like a coffee or a sandwich on your lunch break, the person that made the coffee or the sandwich probably works just as hard as you, is just as interesting of a person as you are, has values and hopes and dreams, and just remembering that like primarily we are people, secondarily we work because we gotta. And then at a bare minimum, remembering that we at least have the power to support politicians and policies that can push for, better situations for working people. And like you said, you might not have time to volunteer constantly, but whether it's being a part of an organization, volunteering when you can, I think doing what you can to push the world in a better direction, to control history, some might say, is good, but just make sure that you're not too hard on yourself and all of that, because it's one of those weird things where like, do you ask that question if you're a bad person, right? Because wouldn't a bad person not even ask that question?
Right, because even just
about
thinking about it, you're demonstrating a kind of introspective, like self-awareness. Just keep in mind, as you were working that customer service job, how you fell into it, and that a lot of people are there for similar reasons.
Yeah. Um, let's see. Justin in the chat's talking about being tired of Christians who lack empathy. Yeah, I'm not like an aggressively anti-religious person, but if you are someone who espouses to be like a Christian or have religious values and you don't have a baseline of empathy for struggling people, I'm just like, what fucking book did you read, dog? Final email today. It's from Vera, or Vera Lynn. It says, hey, Wisecrack. Listen to one of your live streams from July in which you talked about politics and engagement. In this very video, you mentioned that people who are actually good people wouldn't like to be presidents because of the evil deeds that are required with the job. What are the best arguments for aspiring politicians who feel doubtful moving on in their political career for this very reason to keep at it even though the ethical prize might be high? Here's the thing, right? There's a lot of politicians who get into it for cynical reasons, right? Like there's people who I truly, truly believe in my heart of hearts only ever cared about power because power is the only thing and anti-Christian, yada, yada. I'm kidding. Then there's politicians who I think get into it for solid motivation and get the whiff of power, and they go off the rails. I think there's other politicians who come into it with a clear set of principles and it keeps them grounded. I'll just use one example. Like Bernie Sanders has been a politician starting at the, local level for most of his adult life. And it's only been in recent years that people like knew who he was nationally. Bernie Sanders, and like you can find videos of him in the 80s talking about union protections, talking about Medicare for all this sort of stuff. And people just like fucking laugh at him and treat him like the old, Jewish socialist from Vermont, right? And, fast forward to 2020, he's a guy who at one point looks like he's going to get the nomination of the Democratic Party, who last night had one of the primetime speaking slots at the Democratic National Convention that was on every TV channel, talking about the importance of things like Medicare for all and worker protection. So I think kind of like the last question, if you're already thinking in these terms, I think it's just a matter of going into it, knowing what your values are, and maybe having, I guess I would say having a sense in which you, how do I phrase this? Just like knowing what those values are and having people in your life that'll hold you accountable to those values, And if it's a thing, if you get into politics, you want to make a bunch of money, just go make a bunch of money. We got an email that just came in and I'm going to just add this to our list from Callie. Says, can you give me advice on anxiety coping mechanisms for social situations? I find myself not wanting to be in social situations because I don't know what to say. I'm worried about what people think of me. Thanks and take care. Couple quick ones there. I hate social situations. I get really uncomfortable. I was at a kid's birthday party a few weeks ago, and my wife kind of went off with my daughter, and I was like, oh God, what am I going to do? I'm in this backyard. I don't know a lot of people. And then I was kind of near the other dude there who also looked kind of miserable. And he kind of just said hey, what's up? And we talked for an hour about obscure noise music. And now he's someone I want to hang out with. But, in that moment, I'm in my head no one wants to talk to me. And if I do talk, what am I going to say? And blah, blah, blah. And then there's another dude there. And, my self-narrative before we started talking, because I think he initiated, would have been this guy probably he doesn't want to talk to me. This guy looks kind of cool. Maybe he's I just want to be friends with me or anything. Then we start talking and it's fine. So I sometimes remind myself that and I mean this in a positive way, you are not the only person with social anxiety. A lot of people have it, which means that in any social setting, you are not going to be the only one with social anxiety. Imagine for a second, if you're the one with social anxiety and you're kind of standing there awkwardly and someone comes up to you and they say, hey, what's up? I'm Karen. You're probably oh my God, thank you so much for doing that. So sometimes I think it's a challenge to remind ourselves, we're not the worst people in the world who are more anxious than everyone else. And, often and more often than not, if you can make yourself take that first step, it's probably going to go okay. And then in the I don't know what to say things, I'm worried about people think of me. In one sense, we're all afraid that people are going to think bad stuff about us. So another thing you just share so you have that in common with everyone else. And also, if it's just someone you meet at a social setting and let's say they don't like you, okay, not everyone's going to like you, you know? And that's okay. Like do you like everyone? Probably not. But in general, when you don't like people, you probably just are like, oh, they're not really for me. And you just kind of keep it moving. In a really practical sense, if you ever don't know what to say, ask people questions about themselves that aren't, what do you do? Wait to get to that. But like, we all like to talk about ourselves. If I was at a social setting, I know someone said to me like, oh, are you watching any good TV lately? I'm like, fuck, let's go. Let's talk about that. You could ask someone like, even if someone asked me, if I was at a party and I felt uncomfortable and someone was like, hey, weird question, what's your favorite restaurant these days? That'd be fun. I would think about it. And then we'd probably have a conversation from there. So just like, people love to talk about themselves. And this might sound sociopathic, what I'm about to recommend. So if this is too much, file it away. But maybe the next situation you go into, you write down or you put a note thing in your phone or you just think about it. Think about 3 questions that you can ask someone. So if you end up in a social situation and you start to feel anxious, you're just like, okay, here's 3 things I can ask someone. Dapper Cat says, what's the worst thing you've ever done in your life? That's one. What do you love? Is a question someone asked. There was an episode of the show Flight of the Conchords where a character played by Jim Gaffigan said in a social situation, how many people have you met? And I think that's one of the funniest things I've seen in TV show. He just goes, how many people have you met? But yeah, I think that maybe something like that. What do you think, Henry?
The most basic but true advice is they're as scared of people are scared of this as you are. It's pretty common for everybody to be a bit on edge. Earlier, you said, somebody will say thank you for breaking the conversation, or, breaking the ice is a huge thank you. And just remember that relief is pretty common. Like, we're not looking to attack each other at default most of the times in a social gathering. So, yeah, there's going to be some initial awkwardness, but if everybody just kind of accepts, the human flip-floppiness of trying to start a fresh conversation, eventually you'll fall into talking about something.
Yeah. A worst case scenario, just say like, yeah, do you think Marxism is a theology? And then go from there. You can be like, hey, what's your favorite Wisecrack video? Okay, guys, it is noon on the West Coast. We know that that's not real time. So it's 3 p.m. East Coast because that's already been established. That's the real time. Thank you so much for hanging out with us today. As always, please do like the stream if you haven't. Cardell, thank you so much. Hey, it's Cardell who asked the question. Thank you for the really good question. And genuinely, Cardell, like, I think we all mean this when you're worried. Your worry shows us that you're not a bad person. So just keep being who you are. But guys, really appreciate the hang today. Thanks for letting us get into it and express some righteous anger. We'll be back streaming Monday. We have a video coming out on Friday. Old Grease, thank you so much. Old Grease says, taking heroes off pedestals, the only way past. You got to understand why people fascinate you before you move on. Very true. Mm-hmm. We never want to be that obsessed with anyone. It's never that good of a thing to do. Feel free to share any recommendations for stuff you're watching or listening to or anything like that in the chat, because people always want some stuff to occupy their time with. If you have questions after the fact, wisecracklive666@gmail.com, or just leave a comment below. We'll check those out. Thanks as always to producer Henry on the 1s and 2s for making it all happen. And yes, East Coast time is the morally correct time. So we'll be streaming again Monday at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
Have a great weekend, y'all. See you soon.